Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I am so grateful that you've decided to join me for today's episode of the show. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by Offering Tree. Offering Tree is a yoga teacher's one-stop shop for websites, scheduling software, payment, email newsletter, and more. And you're going to hear a lot more about Offering Tree throughout this episode, so stay tuned for that. And today on the podcast, we are talking about running a successful yoga business from your home. This is something that most of us have been doing over the last 6 months. But for me, I've actually been running my business virtually, remotely for the last 5 years. So I've got a couple of tips on how to do this successful from what I've learned over the last couple of years. And so I'm really excited to dive into that. Before we get into the heart of this episode, though, I just wanted to tell you about a couple of webinars that I have upcoming that are free for you to join. So the first one that is upcoming is in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be on September 16th, 2020, if you're listening to this in real time. So Wednesday, September 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And this webinar I am actually doing with Be Yogi. So you've heard lots about Be Yogi on the podcast. They are my go-to insurance provider, and they're running a webinar series. So we are talking about 5 steps to becoming a successful yoga teacher. So I'm going to dive into my key 5 steps for running a successful yoga business as a yoga teacher. And I'm really excited for this. So if you would like to join, you can head on over to beyogi.com. Under resources, they have their webinar series. It's a bit of a long link, so I'll put the link in the show notes for you guys, but you can also head on over to beyogi.com to find that, and it's free to register, like I said. The second webinar that I am going to be hosting is in partnership with Ubindi, which is a new software platform that is actually founded by the founders of Yoga Trail. And they have a ton of good stuff going on, so you should definitely go check them out. But on this webinar, I'm going to be talking about long-term success with online offerings. So diving into a couple different ways that you can expand your business online and then how to be successful with that. So you can head on over to ubindi.com/amanda.kingsmith to find that, and you'll actually see the registration right there. And again, it's a free webinar that you can join. And Ubindi is spelled U-B-I-N-D-I. So ubindi.com/amanda.kingsmith. And once again, there'll be a link for that in the show notes. So I would love it if you would join me for one or both of those free webinars. I think that they're going to be super fun and that we're going to learn a lot together. So I really hope that I will see you there. All right, so let's talk about the 4 keys for running a successful at-home yoga business. And these might be a little bit different than maybe what you anticipated, but for me, over the last couple of years, these have been the really integral parts of my business and being successful with my business. So before we dive into what they are, I wanted to just back up a little bit and give some context for what my current business situation looks like and what it's looked like over the last couple of years. So if you followed along with the podcast since the beginning of 2016 when we launched, first of all, thank you for being here this whole time. But second of all, you would also know that that was kind of along the point of my starting with working online. So my background is that I have a business degree with a major in marketing. When I finished business school in 2011, my now husband and I went traveling for 6 months, and we had this amazing kind of gap year and amazing getaway. And then we returned to where we were living at the time, which was Calgary, Alberta. And we got corporate jobs and we worked in those for a little bit. And the whole time I was working in that corporate job, I just felt like it was not what I was supposed to be doing. It didn't feel like it was super fulfilling, and it really didn't feel like I was on the right path with what I was doing. And so I spent a lot of my time outside of work hours trying to figure out what the next move was. And neither of us really knew what we wanted to do. So what we decided to do about a year and a half into working our corporate jobs was start saving our money so that we could go traveling again, because travel had been this really key piece for us in terms of finding freedom and enjoyment. And so after 2 years of working full time, so this is the beginning of 2014, we quit our job, sold our stuff, and headed down to South America. We had enough saved to travel for 6 months. And near the end of the 6-month period, both my husband and I were thinking about how can we make this more of a long-term thing. And so what we did when we came back to Canada, where I'm originally from, is we moved out of the city into the mountains to Canmore, Alberta, which I now call home. And we took on jobs that were a little bit less demanding of us mentally. So we didn't work corporate anymore. I worked retail. My husband worked in a cafe and then a restaurant after that. And we started working on our side projects, the things that we thought might bring us more enjoyment and joy out of life. And along this part of my journey is where I started working as a studio manager for a yoga studio, which I still work for, as well as I took my teacher training. And so this is when I dove into life as a yoga teacher. So in the time that I gave myself, in the space I gave myself away from corporate work, I was able to kind of connect with the fact that I wanted to become a yoga teacher. Now, soon into becoming a yoga teacher, my husband accepted a 1-year job offer in Atlanta, Georgia. And I decided to move down there with him. And because of the status of being Canadian and with work visas and stuff, I wasn't actually able to transition the job that I was doing in Canada. And so this really put me into the position of needing to figure out online work. And this was pretty fun for me because it had been a goal of mine since I had first started traveling to be able to work and travel. So this was really testing the waters with how I could start working from home. And so at this point, what I was doing is I was teaching some yoga. I was doing online studio management. So I was able to take my job with me to Georgia. And then I was running our travel podcast. Now, along the way with this, MBOM was born. About 4 or 5 months into the time we were down there is when I started MBOM and started working on that. So at that point, I had quite a bit of stuff going on, and it was just a matter of growing my income, growing my clientele, growing my listeners, growing my email newsletter, all of that type of stuff. And so from there, basically the journey continues. My husband finished up his job and he took on remote work as well. So both of us were able to work remote, and we set out into this rhythm that we've had basically since the fall of 2016, which is spending winters away somewhere else and then spending summers back home in Canada. So we spent a winter in Asia, we spent a winter in Mexico City, we spent a winter hopping between Mexico and Guatemala, and then we spent some of this past winter in Panama. So I was actually down in Panama when the pandemic hit. And of course, I came back to Canada a little earlier than planned. And throughout all of this, we have been working online. So I have been working remotely for 5 years as of this fall. And throughout that whole journey, I have learned so much because not only have I worked in one setting, I've worked in hundreds of settings at this point. We actually don't have a permanent home, so we move around quite a bit. So if you are somebody who has a permanent home, you are already one step ahead of me because being able to have designated space is something we're going to talk about as something that's really important. So if you know where you live full time and you've got a home that belongs to you or a long-term lease, then a lot of this stuff should be pretty simple for you to start applying into your business. Because one of the things that I found quite challenging was we moved around a lot. We moved from Airbnb to Airbnb, from city to city, country to country. And a lot of the time, we didn't even know what the workspaces would be like. And that makes things really hard. But I'm also really grateful for that experience because it taught me to be able to sit down and work in pretty much any conditions. Now, that's not my ideal scenario, but I have been able to do that with my business. And over the years, as I've been doing this, my business has really evolved and grown and changed quite a bit. And so before we dive into these 4 keys I want to talk about, I also just want to share a little bit about all the different things that I'm doing, because part of understanding how to make a successful at-home yoga business is also looking at what you have on your plate. So for many of you listening, your schedule and what you do day to day is going to be different from mine, but it doesn't mean that you can't apply these 4 tips to your lifestyle, to your work. And so what I do right now is I currently work with 2 different yoga studios. So one is based here in Canada, like I mentioned, another one is in the US. I do digital marketing and management support with them. It is wonderful, wonderful work. I really love doing that. I also work with yoga teachers one-on-one. As you know, I offer coaching services, so I do have clients through that. So that is a portion of my business. I also have my podcast, which goes out weekly. Then I have the travel side of things. So my husband and I co-run a travel podcast and travel business. So every week we put out a podcast with that. I also have my 3rd podcast, Matcha Mornings, which you should definitely go check out if you have an opportunity. It's at wanderbarn.com. And I put that out every other week. For me, that is definitely something that I'm very much working on the side. So when I look at different things I'm working on, I look at what goes in my work hours and what goes outside of my work hours. And Matcha Mornings is kind of on the cusp of that, where it's a project that I'm turning into work. But as of right now, it's not paying me. So it is a secondary thing that I'm doing. The other thing that I have going on is that I do consultation work. So I consult with yoga teachers, yoga businesses, and do either coaching or web design and stuff like that. So I do have some freelance work as well. So there's quite a bit of things that I'm juggling in my day-to-day. And for many of you listening, I would also imagine the same. Many of you are probably teaching for a number of different studios. Maybe you have another aspect of your business, and then you probably also have a lot of commitments outside of work, being parents or with relationships, partners, social lives, family commitments, etc., etc. So that leaves me to point number 1, or key number 1, which is setting up a schedule. And I want to dive into this one a little bit because it's something I'm really passionate about. Setting up a schedule is so important. And this was something that I actually really fought against when I first started working remotely. And I think that part of this was that when I worked in corporate, I felt very chained to a cubicle and chained to a desk. So the work hours that I had to be at work for were 8:30 to 4:30, and I needed to be there pretty much on time at 8:30, and I wasn't really allowed to leave until 4:30. I was allowed to take, some breaks during the day and a lunch break, but I felt like I was really controlled in terms of my schedule. Then I moved from corporate into retail, and my schedule actually got even stricter. So although my job was a lot more chill, it was a lot more fun, my schedule was stricter and I worked crazy hours. So I didn't work 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. I worked, 11 to 7 one day, 3 to 11 another day, 8 to 3 another day. And so my schedule was all over the place and I had to be there on time, ready to go. And for me, when I started working remotely, like when I left my retail job and moved to Atlanta, I was like, oh, cool. I can kind of discover what schedule I want to set up. I can see if I want to sleep later. I can see how many hours I want to work in the day. I can, work nights if I want. I can go to coffee shops. There was a lot of freedom there. And this is something that is so, so, so cool with us being able to work at home. And for many of you that are now teaching everything from home, have your entire businesses from home, I'm sure you're experiencing a lot of this where you're like, okay, all these doors have opened up where all of a sudden I'm not restricted to only doing laundry on certain days. I can put my laundry on and then go to work because I work from my home. So that is great. And yes, you should absolutely do that. That is definitely something I do. One thing you should keep in mind, though, is that having a designated schedule is going to help so much so that you're not blurring the boundaries of work and personal life. So for me, as I went, I really took advantage of the freedom in my schedule. And then as I filled my work schedule with more stuff, I felt like I was getting a little bit run down because I was checking emails at all hours of the day. I was working at all hours of the day. I would be doing work at 9 a.m. I would be doing work at 9 p.m. And it just felt like I was always on for work. And to me, I love my work and I'm grateful for that, but I still need boundaries with my work, and so do you. So having a schedule for your work that you can bring some flexibility into is going to be really, really huge. And we talk a lot about these aspects, or some of these aspects, in a past solo episode that I did called From Chaos to Clarity. It's all about organization, and it's a lot of organization tips for your schedule. So if you're looking for specific tips for how to create a schedule, how to schedule what you have in there, what types of planners to use, etc., I talk about that in that episode. So we'll put a link for that in the show notes. Another resource I want to share if you're struggling with scheduling is Renee Claire. She's been on the podcast before. We talked about how she helped me hire my VA, and she just did a time management 101 workshop for the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. It was super awesome, and she has really encouraged me to even go deeper with my schedule. So if you are interested in really, really, really getting into the nitty-gritty of your schedule, check out that episode, and then check out the work that Renee Claire is doing over at the Productive Wellnesspreneur. And with this, I would say looking at kind of what is feasible with what you're currently doing, and also looking at kind of your ideal schedule. So what you would like to be doing. So for me, I shot really hard away from this like Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 type vibe. And now I've kind of come back to that. So in general, now I work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And there is definitely flexibility within this. I have days where I book appointments in that time. I have times where I go for coffee with a friend. I sometimes work out or go to yoga during those periods of time, and that's okay. But in general, I have a schedule that is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 is when I do my work. I don't do my work on evenings, and I don't do my work on weekends. And that has really helped me find some balance with my life. And as weird as it sounds, having a schedule is so, so important for having a successful at-home yoga business. So for my yoga teachers out there who are teaching a lot, it's really important that you're really clear on what your yoga teaching schedule looks like, and scheduling some time around that to make sure you have your self-care in there, to make sure that you've got your boundaries and stuff like that. All of this is so important for our sanity and also our success. So the way that I look at success and productivity is really around this idea of less is more, do a little bit less, hopefully get a little bit more out of it, really focusing in that time that I give for myself so that I can be as productive as possible during those hours. So go ahead, set up your schedule, get started with that. And then the second thing is you want to set up a designated workspace. So this is really, really key. And this is going to look a little bit different depending on what you do for your yoga business. So for some of you, you might work mostly from your computer at kind of a desk space. And having that designated space for that is going to be really key. If you are teaching yoga actively, which I'm sure many of you are, having a designated space for that is also going to be key. Now, within this, you can certainly move your devices around. So maybe you have a designated spot where you do your admin time. Maybe it's at a table or at a desk, or maybe you have like a nice chair for that or something like that. You can set up that space, your admin time space, and then you can also set up your recording space. Having this designated space for me is huge mentally. So one of the things that I really enjoyed when I first started working remotely was this idea of being able to work from my bed, which is so funny to think about now because it's not something that I really do anymore. And I think that as you shift from doing things in person to online, being able to enjoy these privileges and these things that you haven't been able to do before is amazing. So there's no shame here if you are listening from bed or you've been working from bed or anything like that. But for me, it's been really, really helpful mentally to have a designated workspace. So what this means is that I work from the same space every day when we're in the same place. And so for you, this might be an office space. It might be a desk in the corner of a room. It might be sitting on a pillow working from a coffee table or something like that. Or maybe it's taking a section of your kitchen table. Whatever it is, that's fine, but I would just suggest having a designated workspace. And so this means that that space is where your mind knows that you do work. And so one of the things that I really struggled with when I first started this, and particularly when I moved to Atlanta, was I had all this freedom. And so I would try working from different spaces at home. I'd get really distracted. I would end up just like cooking or cleaning or on the internet. And so I took myself to coffee shops, and that's how I would focus. And then I moved from there, and I didn't have the same access to great working coffee shops. And so I had to learn how to work in different spaces. And over time, what I've learned for myself, especially because I don't teach a lot of active yoga right now, is that I need a designated space where it's like my workspace. So this is a space where all I do is work. And what it looks like is I've got a laptop stand. It's a neck stand that I got online. I have a keyboard. It's just a MacBook. It's an Apple keyboard. I have a mouse, my MacBook Pro, and then of course I'm speaking into a microphone right now. So something cool that I have is I've got a microphone arm, so it clips onto my desk, and then I can just move the microphone so I don't have to move that too much. And it's amazing because unless I'm traveling, I don't have to move this workstation. And when I get up in the morning and do my morning routine and decide to start working, I bring my tea over here, I open my laptop, and my brain is immediately like work mode. And then when I take my lunch break or my walk break or my exercise break, I am able to close the top of my laptop down and I'm able to go take that break somewhere else. So one of the things that I do is I actually take my breaks away from my computer. And another thing I also do is I don't watch TV on my computer. So this was actually something that was quite tricky, especially while I was traveling quite a lot, because we only had, my husband had his laptop, I had my laptop, and a lot of times we didn't have access to a TV. Now, we don't watch a ton of TV normally, but we do like to watch some, and so we would use a laptop. In the last year, we actually got an iPad, and so now we do all of our TV watching on the iPad, and that has been a game changer mentally. So if it is possible to use your computer as your designated workspace, I would definitely do that. Now, if I was teaching online classes right now, here is what I would do. I would have my admin set up, so at a desk or in a space like I mentioned before, and then I would have a designated space for my online classes. So setting up my mat, my background, my lighting, the stand where I'm going to put whatever device I'm recording on. I would have everything over there and I would leave it. And perhaps the only thing I would move would be maybe my computer or my phone I would take with me depending on what I was using. So if you're doing these two different things, I would actually recommend seeing if you can have two small spaces that you use that are kind of separate from one another. So you have your designated teaching space, you have your designated admin time or business space. And this is going to be so helpful for your shutdown times, for your boundaries, and for your work-life balance. Now, I'm super excited to get into the third tip or the third key that we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, just a quick word from our sponsor. Hey everyone, it's time for a short break and a message from our sponsor, Offering Tree. Most yoga teachers struggle with two things, marketing and time management. It can feel overwhelming and scary to try and put yourself out there to get new clients. There's also never enough time to get everything done, like sending a newsletter, emailing your new clients, or updating your website. Fortunately, Offering Tree created a single platform that can solve all your marketing and time management headaches. With a single account, you can create a website in minutes, set up a newsletter, create a blog, schedule classes, and take payment. The great part is that all of Offering Tree's features work seamlessly together, so you don't need to pay for and manage 5 different services. Instead, you get it all in one easy, affordable package. Offering Tree also provides helpful tutorials and webinars to keep you growing as a teacher. It's part of their mission as a public benefit corporation. Offering Tree has been supporting MBOM for well over a year now, and I love their product and their company. They're providing special pricing for MBOM listeners, so if you're ready to move from overwhelm to confidence with your digital presence, then check them out at offeringtree.com/MBOM. Again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, now back to the episode. All right, so now that we're back from the break, we're moving on to the third tip that I want to talk about today. And I've already mentioned this one. This is taking breaks. And this is huge. And I would love, just for a second, for everyone listening to really be honest with themselves about whether or not you give yourself breaks during the day. Do you give yourself breaks or time before and after your yoga classes? Do you actually sit down and enjoy your lunch? Do you take breaks for your personal practice or your own exercise? Do you take breaks to read during the day? Do you take breaks to see a friend or go for a walk? And do you take time off on the weekends? Is that something that you do? Be really honest, because there's no shame, there's no blame, there's no real right or wrong on how to do this. The key is that you are actually giving yourself this time. And my bad habits around breaks actually started back when I worked in corporate. We didn't have a really great break room for lunch. And so I got in the habit often of just taking lunch at my desk. I worked in a pretty small office. There wasn't that many people there. And I often just didn't leave. And sometimes I would go and meet a friend for lunch, but more often than not, I would just stay inside and eat at my desk, maybe check personal emails, maybe just work through my lunch so I could leave a little bit early or something like that. And that habit definitely carried through into working from home. So I would take a break to maybe make something or heat something up or get some leftovers ready to go, or maybe even order something. And then I would just eat while I was at my computer. And this really ties into the last thing that I talked about. So only having one device to work off of meant that sometimes I would think I was taking a break by doing something that wasn't work related, but I could see my emails. I could see all the stuff I'd been working on. So my brain wasn't really separating from the actual work I was doing. So now when I take breaks, I actually shut the top of my computer down and I actually step away from my computer. So in the current setup that I'm in, I told you guys about my laptop stand, my laptop, my microphone arm, mouse, keyboard. I work at a desk in the corner of our kitchen. And I take my lunch breaks at the kitchen table. So it's probably only like 2 feet from my desk. It's not very far away. I don't have a whole separate room for this. Yet being able to close the top of the laptop, close my email down, and being able to actually go to the table to eat where my brain knows, okay, this is eating time, gives me that relaxation. It gives me that rejuvenation so that when I come back to my workspace, I'm able to get a lot of work done. And this principle applies for all breaks around eating, of course, but it also applies to things like exercise, time for reading, outdoor time, and that type of thing. Sometimes we get in the habit of work. We have so much to do and we just want to get it all done. At least that's how I am. So if you are like that, I can definitely resonate with that very, very much. And it's really hard for me to take a break when I've got a bunch of stuff to do. But one of the things that I've really been learning is that these mental breaks are so key for me to be more productive. So I have to know that I need a break when I can't decide what task to work on, or I'm just really reacting. I'm just flying through emails. I'm feeling really stressed and tense in my body. That's when I know it's time for a break. And so depending on what your schedule looks like and what your workspace looks like, I would also designate spots and times in your day for breaks. Time for lunch, time for exercise, time for you. This is super, super important. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because I hear constantly that people aren't doing these things. It is not just me. There are many, many people out there that just aren't giving themselves the grace of a lunch break because they have so much on the go. They have students who need them. They have lots of things to do. They're teaching classes and they're managing a million other things. And so they're like, it's okay. I'll just grab a protein bar or something like that, or I'll just make a smoothie on the go. No, we need to take time to sit down and actually take a little mental break. So that is tip number 3. And then moving into tip number 4, we're building off of that. And this is planning time off, planning time for adventures, and planning time for self-care. So taking time off is another thing that I found super, super hard when I transitioned into working for myself. And here's why. The reason why is because when I worked in corporate and when I worked full time, there were other people that I worked with. I worked with a big team and I was able to set an out of office for vacations where I could just say, if you have an emergency, email so-and-so, and they were responsible while I was gone. I worked in an office that had designated work hours. They had designated that their offices were open from, 8:30 until 4:30 or like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And one of the things that I worked with my life coach on this year is she talked about, if you were a business entity like a bakery, what are your hours? And I thought to myself about the fact that I'm kind of a bakery that is open from 9 to 5, but sometimes decides to close their doors at different times and can sometimes be reached on Saturdays and Sundays. And she was like, well, that's a little bit confusing. And I thought to myself, yeah, well, I'm trying to be so flexible and answer people promptly and quickly. I'm actually kind of confusing people and myself, and I'm burning myself out. So one of the things I have done over the last couple of months in my business has been really working with this schedule, really working on this Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 with weekends off. And I really noticed during the pandemic how much my time off previously to this had been around social activities and travel. So if you know me, you know I love to travel. Travel is my love. Yoga and travel are my biggest passions. And when I wasn't able to travel anymore, I was like, well, I'm not really doing anything, so I might as well just get some work done. And this is a really interesting mindset because on the one hand, fundamentally, I'm not opposed to this idea of getting work done if you're not doing anything else. But really, this means that you don't really have that time mentally for your brain to disconnect. And in my 300-hour yoga teacher training program that I did last year, we talked a lot about the science of meditation and the brain waves. And one of the things that's happening in our society scientifically is that our brain is actually not relaxing. So we go through a couple different stages of brain waves before we go into sleep. And if you go from this like really accelerated place of brain waves right into sleep, you're not getting as much rest and rejuvenation. And we actually have some of our most creative times in terms of the way our brain works when we're not doing anything, when we don't have inputs and we don't have stimulus. And so all these things put together kind of just made me realize that in these moments of, oh, well, I'm not doing anything, I'll just get something done, it's not really helping me. It's not helping you. It's not helping my students. It's not helping my creativity. It's not helping in any real way other than ticking something off the to-do list, which I could do in a designated work time at a later point. And so for me, I've had to get a little bit creative. Now things are pretty open here in Canada right now. We've had a great summer. We've been able to get out lots hiking and doing a little bit of domestic and local travel. So that's been super helpful. But during the months of March, April, May, and even into June a little bit here, it was a bit challenging because a lot of stuff was closed. We weren't really allowed to see people. And it was freezing cold, so couldn't really spend that much time outside. And I had to get creative and also set a lot of boundaries. So if this is something that you struggle with, I would definitely encourage you to make sure you're taking 2 back-to-back days off and making sure that you are giving yourself some downtime. If you can't take 2 back-to-back days off, can you take 2 off in general? Can you take 1 off, have 1 designated day off? This is so important. Days where you don't check your email, you don't respond to texts from students, you don't teach any classes, you don't do any admin work, you just relax. And this is your time for adventures, for yourself, for relationship time, social time, self-care time. In this time period, I really like to go on hikes. I like to go on walks with my husband. I like to go out to restaurants with friends. I like to see my family and friends. And I like to do self-care activities like go for massages or journal and read in the park, take baths. Those are the things I like to do. And when I give myself this time, I come back feeling so rejuvenated. So it is super, super important. And I really, really hope that you guys are able to do that in your business. And it takes a little bit of discipline, quite honestly, because when you're working from home, you always know that your computer is there. You always know that your email is there. And so you have to consciously be like, I am not checking this right now. And that is the key. So if you have been struggling with setting yourself up successfully at home, I hope that these tips will help you. So before we finish up this episode, I just want to run through them one more time, just so you guys have an overview and you'll see how they really work together. So the first one is setting up a schedule. Get really clear on what your schedule looks like and the hours that you work and the hours that you don't work. Next, set up a designated workspace. So this is a workspace where you do your work. If you're teaching yoga and you're running your business, have a space for teaching yoga that stays set up and have a space for doing your admin time. And with this, make sure that your space for admin time is not the same as the space where you sleep or where you eat. This should be a designated space for your work. Next, you want to make sure that you're taking breaks throughout the day. The most important break to take is, of course, a lunch break, a designated time where you sit down and eat, where you're not doing work, not answering emails, or anything like that. You also want to take breaks for personal practice, exercise, reading, walks, time in nature, and maybe even some time with friends if you can fit that in. Whatever you do, make sure that you're giving yourself breaks in between your work. It is so, so important for productivity and being successful with working from home. Finally, time off. Plan time for adventures, for self-care, for yourself, for your relationships, and make sure this time is unobstructed and undistracted. And when I say that, I mean from your work. So you can love your work and love your life at the same time. And this is actually going to be really key for loving your work. One thing that I've found really challenging, particularly over the last year, is that I've been so busy that a lot of this stuff has been really slipping to the side. Yes, I had a great designated workspace. Yes, I had a pretty solid schedule, but taking breaks has not been so great. And over the last couple of months, taking time off has been really, really challenging for me personally. And I say it's because I'm busy, but honestly, it's just because I wasn't setting that time for myself and setting the boundaries. And as I've been doing that over the last couple of months, it's felt so, so good. Now, why is all of this stuff important? Well, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is really, really key so that you can have a really happy work life and not feel resentful to it. Because when all we do is work and we don't have any boundaries around the times that we answer emails or where we say yes to things, we're going to start resenting the work that we do. And when we resent the work that we do, we're not going to show up 100% ourselves or in our highest capacity. And as a yoga teacher and as a yoga business owner, you want to be showing up 100% for your students. You want to show up feeling excited that you get to do this work. And when the excitement and that spark comes out of it, it means we need to look at the systems that we're working in. And for me, looking at this stuff over the last little bit has been super, super key. So once again, set up a schedule, set up a designated workspace, take breaks, and plan time off for adventures, self-care, and just general days off. Sometimes that means doing nothing. So that is everything for today. I hope that you enjoy this episode of the show. I hope that you got a lot out of it. I have some awesome new content going live in September, and I cannot wait to share all of that with you. So stay tuned for that. As always, a huge thank you to the sponsor for the show, Offering Tree. Make sure you go check them out, offeringtree.com/MBO. And just before you go, there's one last quick thing that I wanted to tell you about. If you've been listening for the last couple of months, you know we got a makeover with our intro, outro, and we are a part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, which my husband Ryan and I founded together. And we just brought a brand new podcast into the Wander Barn Podcast Network. It is called People Talking People, and it is hosted by Randall Hill and Jennifer Maynard. If you want to go listen to People Talking People, they have a ton of great episodes on there talking about all sorts of topics, from career changes to what makes somebody interesting to follow to how crazy this year has been and so much more. You can head on over to wanderbarn.com for that. All right, as always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.